Următorul nostru invitat, cu siguranță îi știți pe marea majoritate, mi-am luat pentru care câteva informații extrem de importante și vreau să le citesc cu acuratețe. Are o companie foarte interesantă, o corporație certificată B, care adoptă săptămâna de lucru de 4 zile. Conform standardului de aur, săptămâna de lucru de 4 zile a fost o chestiune des întâlnită în media românească și discutată pentru companii, dacă este eficient sau nu să lucreze angajații 4 zile. Totodată, cartea sa din 2017, HR transformațional, oameni pasionați sau afaceri pasionate, a fost recunoscută ca fiind una dintre cele mai bune 100 de cărți de strategie de afaceri din toate timpurile. Am mai lansat și partea a doua în luna iulie anului 2021. Și desigur sunt foarte multe informații valoroase. Doamnelor, domnilor, Perry Timms, fondator și CEO al PTHR.
Bună ziua! So, thank you for allowing me to present in English. So I want to thank you first of all. I get to speak at a lot of HR conferences around the world, and I can guarantee you that nobody does style in HR like Romania does, because you all look fabulous, and the shoe quality, especially the ladies, is off the charts. So thank you. Thank you. I also wanted you to show some appreciation for our translators who are working tirelessly today. So translators, mulțumesc. And that's not all. Our moderators, Constantine, Simona, they've been on all day and keeping the enthusiasm up and helping you get back in time. Thank you, Simona. Thank you, Constantine. Okay. So you put the HR in hardcore because you're still here. You are the hardcore, the real stalwart, the stamina, and thank you for doing so. Okay, so I'm Perry from England. I wanted to point out that little tiny B in a circle at the top of that screen. My organisation, People and Transformational HR, is a certified B Corporation. A show of hands, who has heard of a B Corporation in the room? Thank you, a few. What it means is that an organisation can adopt standards that means it looks after the environment, it looks after communities, obviously it looks after clients and customers, and it looks after its own people. Essentially, a B Corporation is an organisation with soul. And I'm very proud that my company is that kind of organisation. So, you may have seen the movie Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. And I was inspired by the name of this conference, Everything HR, because if you work in HR, it seems like it is everything HR, everywhere HR, all at once HR. So if you are working in recruitment or payroll or business partnering or learning and development or OD or anything, it feels like this is what it's like. We have to do everything, everywhere, all at once. And so again, like Tracy earlier, I used AI to create images for you. This was my prompt to say, show me a representation of everything HR, everywhere HR, all at once HR in the homage of the movie, and we have a kung fu warrior princess who is doing the HR work of the future. And all the images that you see today have been created by this application, Leonardo AI. I say that because if you are used to prompting for artificial intelligence images, they can be a bit weird at times. We heard earlier on about human hallucination. I think we also get that in artificial intelligence, but thank you, Leonardo, for doing that. I mean, he looks like he's from a heavy metal band rather than an artist, right? But thank you, Leonardo, for that. Now, I put this image into Leonardo because I wanted it to show a representation of not just AI, but all of these other eyes. So we have pandemic implications, we have global instability, we have a climate imperative, we have economic imbalance, we have national insecurity, and we have artificial intelligence. But I tell you what we need is HI, which is human ingenuity. I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what that looks like and what that means, because, again, when I asked Leonardo to show me the HR professional of the future, this is what it gave me, a kind of cybernetic, connected person. Because it's not just artificial intelligence I want us to talk about that is AI. I want us to look at audacious imagination. Because the machines cannot create audacious imagination, only we can. And in HR, we are not always known for our audacious imagination, quite the opposite. But there's a calling on this profession right now that we have to become known as the most audaciously imaginative part of the business world. And let's have a look at what that means. Here's another image. This is show me the HR professional of the future in a cyberpunk style, and that's what it came back with. Now, we heard earlier on from Anil about technology and about the singularity, and there's also something called the Turing test. Now, the Turing test was developed by the digital pioneer Alan Turing, and what he said was, there will come a point in the future where we cannot tell the difference about interacting with an artificial machine and a human being. Now, for those of you in the room who know your psychometric tools, you will know something called OCEAN. Openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. This sits at the heart of every single psychometric test we perform that helps us understand more about people's behaviors, about their natural inclinations, about their traits, about their deployment of how they want to be in the world. Now, on this diagram, you can see three different color formations. The green dot is where people at the American Institute, the Academy of Sciences, asked ChatGPT to complete a psychometric test, and you can see how it scored. Now, the orange line is ChatGPT 4, the current version, the one that browses the web, the one that's a bit more up to date. And the blue dotted line is a human being. There's almost no difference between ChatGPT 4 and the human being. So if you're in recruitment and you're asking somebody to complete a psychometric test, how do you know that's not been outsourced to ChatGPT 4? How do you know that is the individual's traits, or they have outsourced that to technology? And do we care? Do we really need to know that? But this shows you how closely the alliance, if you want, between machines' understanding of what we're asking it and what we then can interpret from it as being something that's very present in us right now. There's also a ton of statistics that I won't go into in massive detail, but these are talking about the impending nature of artificial intelligence and automation technology impacts on the world of work. So McKinsey have done some extensive research, and they've said 6 out of 10 current occupations are likely to have a third of that work automatable, taken away from human beings, put into scripts and logical sequences of code. That has huge implications for the amount of jobs and work that we are able to do or that we want to do. It has positives, it has negatives. We know from earlier on that that's what we're talking about. But predictors at Capital Economics looked at sort of 2000s, mid-2000s and onwards about the economic likelihood that artificial intelligence is going to increase the amount of worth and value and money in the world. And as we can see from this chart, if you're in the US, that looks like it's quite bountiful. Canada's pretty reasonable. The UK, not so good. Germany, pretty good. Japan, pretty good compared. France and Italy, again, differing. But the concept really of this is that the advent of artificial intelligence isn't just convenience. There is economic value that people are predicting it will create. Now, that is quite an alluring prospect to investors. That's a huge draw for shareholders, and it's the sort of thing that governments will be thinking about when they're looking at economic prosperity in their countries. So if we look at the 2022 and then the 2040 kind of league tables on productivity, the US is still the number one force, China's still the number two force, but India is moving up the charts, people like Indonesia are coming in, and Russia and Italy, apologies, are struggling. So this is telling us that there are nations who are likely to become more beneficially endowed financially if they're using automation technology. That's normally what happens, follow the money type thing, right? But of course there are implications to work, and we heard earlier on about the World Economic Forum and their research on skills, and if you track that, they have predicted a number of core skills. But this chart tells you about actual jobs. The purple squares equate to 83 million jobs lost because of automation. 83 million jobs that will not exist anymore. The blue, that's the good news, is the jobs that will be maintained, even with automation significantly helping out. Now, if you're in HR, the good news is the predictions all tell us the majority of HR roles are in the blue. But the green is interesting because the green is 69 million new jobs created. Now, just to give you an illustration and an example on this, when the United States Air Force were exploring pilotless vehicles and what we would call drone technology now, there was a big project on the Predator drone, and that was both a reconnaissance vehicle and an attack device as well. And of course, everybody said, well, if we're going down the route of unmanned aerial vehicles, that means the end of jet fighters, that means the end of pilots, the end of ground crews, all of that work goes. Now, each Predator drone has 15 people that support its operation. It has rotating pilots. It has a series of data analysts who are looking at the data that's coming back from the Predator drone in real time. Those jobs didn't exist before. Now, as we still know, there are still jet planes, there are still jet pilots, and there are still ground crews. So this, I want to give you a sense that it isn't complete and utter destruction of roles, but it is the creation of a very different way to look at what we use machines for and what that means to us in the roles and the work that we do. So I guess my question is not that there's almost like a mathematical equation here, it's what is the nature of those green square roles? And who is going to come to a division in the organization to help scope and develop and build those roles? We are going to be asked to scope, develop, and build those roles. We will see skills emerging and we'll see jobs that exist, and we will have to find people and create the compensation and benefits and the working systems that need to support that. So this is a rather weird image from Leonardo when I asked it to show me what happens when we see less top-down bureaucratic control and more bottom-up trickle through. A kind of Dali-esque kind of image, isn't it? But I think that's what we're seeing. We are seeing that leaders at the top of organizations do not have the answers anymore. The kind of challenges that we're facing, everything, everywhere, all at once, isn't something that those leaders have been equipped to do. So they need help. So therefore, it can't be what the top says that trickles down. It's what the bottom and the middle and even the outside can help us construct that we take up, that we actually almost turn into advisory for our leadership teams, because it is simply too much for them to cope with and make strategic decisions in the real-time, fast-paced, complicated, complex world that we're in. So we see this audacious imagination coming back, right? And what I think that means is, and this is a really strong calling for us in HR particularly, it will no longer be linear bureaucracy and simplification that gets us the success that we need. It will be paradoxes. It will be intuition. It will be dealing with complexity and accepting that you cannot simplify everything. You have to get better at dealing with complexity. So we've got some real muscle to build in that sort of capacity. And that, I have no idea what that image is trying to portray, but that's what it said when I prompted it. It gave me this weird tree thing, right? Okay, this is better. I like the neon for a start. So when we talk about audacious imagination, what I think this looks like in almost like a soulful context is that we go from machine-like organizations. Ironically, artificial intelligence and automation is more machinery, but I think what it's calling us to do is to deploy that replicability, standardization, scale, to enable us to become more organism-based so that we can deal with that variability, we can handle uniqueness, we can actually start to balance more of the things that we want to do in the world of work. And one of my favorite words of anything to do with work is a 5th century Greek term called eudaimonia. And what the word means is the highest form of human good and the replicable constant state of flourishing. Now, we talk about employee engagement, we talk about people experience, but believe me, there is no stronger sense of I matter, what I do has value and impact, and I'm fulfilled in how I do that by the state of flourishing. That is an aspiration that is really within HR's kind of grasp. Now, some of you may know the work of Josh Bersin. He's an American-based analyst, and for about the last 15 or 20 years, he has extensively researched, particularly learning and talent, and he wrote a book about a year and a half ago called Irresistible. He looked at 7 organizations who were breaking new ground, who were changing their operating paradigm and operating model, and so he called them the world's most enduring, employee-focused organizations. One of them was HubSpot. If anybody knows anything about HubSpot, it's an organization that has a very renowned customer relationship management product, but if you work at HubSpot, it is a very modern, inclusive, progressive, dynamic organization. Now, on the side here, you can see what Josh Bersin has kind of codified for us in these organizations. He said these enduring organizations do not operate in strict hierarchies. They are obsessed with teams, small teams who perform task and finish and problem-solving activities. He's even seen, and we heard this earlier on, the end of employment, he's seen jobs disaggregate in favor of people having different things to do in their work. So one of the things I've always been troubled by is the obsession with job descriptions, you know, the sort of 5-page competency blah, blah, blah. We get rid of them because people with capabilities go to the work that needs to be done. Bersin's also noticed that in these companies, they don't obsess about rules because culture holds everything together. So we don't need to be parental about what we do with our employees. We recognize that a strong culture has a self-regulating, protective, enabling force that it pushes towards good outcomes. And that we obsess less about outputs, but we double down on people experience because these companies have happy employees, and guess what? They have happy customers. There's a small entrepreneur in the UK called James Timpson, and he runs a national outlet of tiny shops that will fix watch batteries, they will resole the heel of your shoe, and they will cut you a key to get in your front door, right? So they do pretty simple stuff. He employs a lot of ex-offenders, so he helps them rehabilitate back into society. He has tracked his employees' happiness to his company's profits, and guess what? The graph is the same. If they're happy, the profits are up. If they're not happy, the profits go down. This is almost like non-science, but actually proven that if we look after our people, they tend to look after our business, including its interest for profitability, if that's what you do. Now, if anybody in the room from Deloitte? No, that's a shame, because last time I did a presentation and talked about this, there was somebody in the room from Deloitte. They were so gleeful that I showcased their work. They sought me afterwards and thanked me. But anyway, Deloitte have, for a number of years, reported on what they call human capital trends. The word human capital gives me a bit of a reaction because it feels like the commoditization of humans. But what it's trying to say is human beings have a capital value. They create value through dedication, creativity, ingenuity, togetherness, problem solving. So human capital trends looks at what is going on around the people game. Now, what I find really interesting about this is it validates some of the things I've been talking about earlier on. And Bursin's work, it talks about a concept called boundaryless HR. And what does that kind of service? Well, they have a new way of looking at performance. It isn't just productivity or the concept of that. It is actually the whole element of human performance. And their maths on it is talking about human sustainability, so how we look after balance and flow and energy, what we heard a lot of in the well-being presentations earlier on, around the concept of good jobs and interesting and impactful work equals human performance. So, what do they say about this? They say that in the era of human-centered work, new sources of data and artificial intelligence can help organizations shift from measuring productivity to human performance. So we should embrace the concept of artificial intelligence to give us more data about the difference our people make. You know, when we look at the human capital dashboard in most companies, how many people have we got? Some companies still don't know how many people they've got on their books. They kind of go roughly 2,412, like roughly or really? Some with high attrition, it's a moving target, right? And then they say, and this is how much they cost, they tell us. Salary, pay bill, benefits, on-costs, pension, tax contributions, and so on. And then they say, and when they're absent, when they're not well, that also costs us because they're not their productivity and performance, and we have to hire in some temporary agency people. That's how much they cost. It's like, is that the zero-sum simplicity that we put on humans? What about when humans care for their clients, and a client who may want to drop their order suddenly becomes convinced by somebody being so dedicated to supporting them that they maintain that contract and they continue to do so year on year. There's so much more to human performance than we currently measure. If we can deploy artificial technology and automation, we can probably get much more data that tells us the actual value that people have. How many people buy from an organization because the people who work there are terrific? They look after them, they care for them. It can make the difference between one car and another car on how the people in the dealership look after you. Anyway, they also talk about more imagination. What do organizations need? More disruption and boundaryless. We've heard that a lot today. They also talk about the future of work requires human resources to evolve, shifting from siloed function to this boundaryless discipline integrated with the people, business, and community it serves. Quick show of hands, any of you involved in your ESG agenda or strategy, or a few people? Yeah. Environmental, social, governance. It talks about the organization existing in an ecosystem of a community, a sector, a market. It talks about an organization that has value to the community and people who come to work there and their families. It talks about organizations who support education, who take people from disadvantaged situations and give them career choices in life. So there's much more to the community side of things. And then this bit I absolutely love. Because when we talk about organizations, and particularly senior leaders, now, AI has a habit of hallucinating. We know that. It makes up answers. When I go into executive boards, they do the same thing. Because when I ask them about the culture, they tell me what the culture is. And guess what? When I go to the canteen or the warehouse or the retailer, I get a different version of the culture. And one that's completely different from this utopian thing that the leaders think they live in, right? But leaders would be wise if they didn't focus on a monoculture. There is no such thing as a monoculture, because the culture of you and your team is what you feel and participate in and build every day. You don't necessarily get up in the morning and think, today I'm going to create a culture for the whole organization that look. You don't do that. You go, me and my team, we're going to push on, we're going to work together, we're going to create a sense of unity, togetherness, we're going to solve problems. Because that's near to you, that's important. Your culture is something that you are an active participant in, and if you're not, you just get whatever's there and have to stick it. But leaders are delusional, mostly, about the culture they have. They espouse the culture they want it to be. And as we heard from Anil earlier on, that may not be the truth. That may not be right. So there's some really important things, but summarizing this, HR, so you in this room, are moving from managing employment to orchestrating work. You are not military marching band anymore. You are jazz or hip hop or drum and bass or a combination of the three. Now, how about marching band, drum and bass? That might be quite cool. Certainly quick beats, right? So, the kind of paradigm I think we're heading into, we've heard a little bit of this earlier on, is that currently we're in the knowledge economy. Lots of businesses are service-based. They don't actually have a product, so to speak, that's real and tangible and in a box. But let's take insurance. Insurance is a product. If you have an accident in your car, that insurance will help you compensate, so it has value, right? But it doesn't come in a box that you plug in. It is just an intellectual construct and a contract and rules, right? So lots of work we are in now is in the knowledge economy. But in the next 10 years, no doubt about it, we are headed to the automation era. Because that insurance will not be a blanket €500 yearly policy based on your postcode and your age and whether you've got any convictions for driving. It will probably be a data feed that gives the insurer all of your driving habits, how much speed you do and don't do, how much distance between cars, how many times it takes you to parallel park. That could be tricky, right? But I think that's what will happen. You'll have real-time data that says, you're a good driver. You don't have to pay €500 for the speed racers down the road. You get €200 because you're a good driver. And that's going to benefit us as consumers because the automation era will open up previously generic products and principles to increasingly tailored products. And guess what? Increasingly tailored work experiences. Choice of when, where, how, and what to work on, what career path to take, who I assemble with as a team. But the most important thing for me is in 2044, and I'm not exaggerating how quickly we need to do this, we need to be headed to the regenerative era. The planet we're on, the weather we're having, the fact that we only have something like 60 harvests with the topsoil nutritional value that we have now, before it starts to get really difficult to grow things without chemical additions, which who knows what they may do. We need to regenerate the planet. We need to regenerate communities. We need to regenerate what it is to be a human as part of a natural ecosystem. We owe it to the planet to do that. And then there is a kind of way of looking at this in more detail. This is what the hallmarks are of the knowledge economy. Largely it's built around profit. It's all about sectors, tech sector, public sector, place, company, contract. These are all the things we recognize, right? These are all the things that we in HR build products for and create services for. But in the automation era, it's different. Because as we heard earlier on, not just younger people, but certainly younger people don't want to go just for profit. They want to go for a company that does good. They want to go for a company that looks after the community and people and invests in regenerative things. So we're seeing much more of that. And we're also seeing intersections where private companies and charitables and social enterprises will come together to solve problems and create solutions to the things that we see. So it will be less about a place and more about a space and so on and so on and so on, right? So these are the hallmarks of what automation will give us. It will naturally call us to change the paradigms we operate in. And then the regenerative era is quite literally more ecocentricity. Much more about community, much more about choice, much more about prosperity. Not just profit, prosperity, which means a whole range of things that people value become valuable. When you often ask people who have left an organization because they're burnt out, would they have had 10,000 more euros to stay there? No. They'd say, I wanted some time away. I wanted some time for me. I wanted some balance. I wanted to have more sustainability. So prosperity doesn't just mean money. It means richness in all manner of things. So there's definitely something evolutionary and craft-like about what we do in 2044. When we come together here in 2044, we're all going to do that, right? When we come together, maybe our holograms will come here in 2044, But we'll likely want to come here. We will probably talk more about craft and the things we are doing to regenerate the planet than we are talking about profit. Because that was what will matter. Because that will become profitable. That will be the way that we measure our success. Now, this is the weirdest image that Leonardo gave me. I asked it to talk through different kind of career cycles of people. For some reason, it gave me some weird old man in a coat, and then an even weirder old man in a coat, and then Darth Vader stormtrooper thing, right? So I give up on that. But I think what I was trying to get to is this. Everything in terms of maturity is on a shorter timeline and trajectory. So, for example, when we talked about ChatGPT earlier on, it hit 100 million users quicker than any other thing we have ever released to the world. And that's just going to continue on that cycle. Things will become proliferated and normalized much more quickly. So therefore, our learning curves also have to match that shorter lifespan maturity and so on, right? If you were good at prompting in ChatGPT 3, forget it, because now it's ChatGPT 4, and some of those prompts don't work anymore. You have to adapt this stuff quite literally in real time. So if you're in learning and development, stop talking about programs and just talk about a learning culture and learning in the flow of work, because that's what you'll need. By the time you've built a program, it's irrelevant. This stuff is getting more audaciously quick, so therefore we have to be more audaciously imaginative. I also wanted to talk about this as a technology, right? So we talk about how do we create strategies? How do we get a long-term trajectory and short-term activities? It's a constant paradox, a constant dilemma. Now, so far what we've seen is, with those short maturity curves, we should plan for a tighter time frame to do some things in, but we have to still be long-term vision. I work with a client, they're in transport, they have a 60-year strategy, 6-0. Because they are thinking, maybe we'll have discovered teleportation by then, whatever, right? Now, the way they're going to get there and test it is by a series of what's called S-curves. So here you start to develop a technology and you test it, and then you start to get really good at it, and it starts to have real impact. But at a point in time, it starts to become a little bit irrelevant, and eventually it will plateau, and actually with a lot of technology, as we know, and systems, it will drop. It will become less desirable, less useful. The key with an S-curve is before you even hit peak, start thinking about your next strategy, your next wave of change. Because as it plateaus, you are already on a trajectory for something that will maintain and service and build your future. S-curves is possibly the most important strategic tool we could all start to think about, right? And I'll give you an example that might bring this to life. So if we talk about the end of jobs and employment, you go, really? Oh, I have palpitations about 50 million contractors who I'm trying to manage through some kind of arrangement, right? Don't worry about it, it won't be like that. As you start to develop a kind of an employment proposition that's different, and you start to get traction with experts, capability pools, different models, as that starts to get a little bit out of date, you're already starting to think about what kind of different contingent workforce you could use, how you can link in with education, how work becomes projects and assignments, not business as usual, and you're already overtaking the demise of what you're currently working on. That's what we have to get good at. So how do we do that? Now, when we heard from Onyi earlier on, he had an absolute blast of alliterations. 3 words that start with the same letter. I can't remember them all, but there were a lot. And I've got 3 myself. Now, he had deliberate, didn't he, as well? So I've got that one too. There is something about us being very deliberate about the things that we invest in, about the tools that we make sure we are supplying to people and so on. As a result of that, we're on our S-curves here. Our next port of call is to be much more diversified. We can be deliberate about fixing problems and creating solutions, but then we have to start working on diversification, different forms of employment contract, different reward mechanisms, different ways of attracting and supporting people through careers. And then we end up being much more dynamic. Now, this excites me a lot about the profession because HR as a profession has been very good to me. It's given me a lot of love, and I want to give it a lot of love back. And I think the reason I love it so much is because we are on the cusp of being the most dynamic function in the business. And the rest of the business will go, well, you're kidding, right? HR, most dynamic, you make the rules, you spoil parties, you sack people, you don't pay us enough, you don't give us the learning we want when we want it. Yeah, we can say none of that. That's all history, because we could potentially show the rest of the business how dynamic we can be in creating an organization that moves and bends and shapes and reassembles per the needs of that particular business. So how do we do that? Now, some of this you might recognize. Some of this may be a bit of a stretch. Some of this you may have even moved on from before. But here we have what deliberate looks like. You focus on talent, you focus on partnering, and you focus on services. Not that different from the Ulrich model, if that's what you use now, right? But talent is end-to-end. The attraction of talent, the acquisition of talent, the deployment of talent, the development of talent. We don't need different divisions in HR handing over different parts of the talent lifecycle. We need a team that are devoted on the end-to-end of talent in mobility sense and in performance sense, which frees up our partners to do much more of the strategy and the change and the determination of what we need to do to stabilize and to perform, to allow us to strengthen the underpinning services. Does anybody here work in shared services or people operations or HR administration? Quick show of hands. Hallelujah, thank you for doing what you do, because you completely hold us all together, so thank you. And we still need that. Automation will not completely remove that. Now, if we talk about diversified, that's slightly more maturing now, because we are centering more on the products that we provide for the people who come to our businesses to work. So we get really good at strategic workforce plan. No 9-box grid succession based on whether I like you or don't like you, or whether you're the son of the chairman or something, right? None of that. We have really robust data-led strategic workforce plans to help us with contingency, and we have skills-based learning. We don't just have privilege, and we don't just have the kind of programs that we used to. We also need to get an incredibly strong arm on science and things like wellness, as we heard earlier on, the relationships we build at work, the potential that people have, and the effectiveness of how they work, and then the systems. When people sort of know that I work in HR, they say, oh, you're a people person, aren't you? And I go, well, I am, but do you know people? Because some of them can be pretty messy and pretty nasty and pretty unhelpful. But systems, I love systems, because systems are where we can end up creating amazing, flourishing, high potential, high performing, sustainable human beings, or we can bore the pants off them so they go work for a competitor, or even worse, we are oppressive and they feel ill about the work they do. So the systems are so important to us, but I don't think the rest of the business world knows we are good at systems. So we need to get stronger in that space. And then, of course, people ops, people intelligence, machine teaming. Now, this is where we don't just outsource to a machine, but we create a reciprocal teaming relationship with our bots. Maybe we have a little thing in our top pocket and we talk to our operating system and we fall in love with it, I don't know. But I think we need to get really good at not just humans using technology and machines, but how we team together. What do we outsource to the bot? What can the bot help us with? And the diversified, I like this futuristic image. It's a bit like Tracy's. I don't know why, but when we put a future of work prompt in Leonardo, it gives us some kind of laboratory. So maybe the future of work is massively experimental, I don't know, or clinical, or boring, I don't know. Anyway, ESG, I talked about that earlier on. People will talk about ESG as just dressed up corporate social responsibility. Rubbish. ESG is how we say we're here for the planet, we're here for the communities and the people we work for, and we do it well and ethical and sound and sustainable and compliant and legal. We have to get much better about how we talk about value creation. What value do we create in the people function? Because it's lots, but we don't have all of it to report on. And it must be more circular and regenerative. Communities and guilds, I think this is a really interesting, almost like back to the future thing, right? So I know some organizations who don't have fixed teams anymore, and they work in pharmaceutical. And so there are people who work in science and research who go, So what's my professional identity then if I'm not in this team looking at pioneering drug treatments? It's okay, just join the guild of pioneering drug researchers, and that's where you get your professional development, that's where you hang out, but when you do the work, you don't do it with all of them, you do it with an end-to-end product team, and that's exactly what Bayer are doing now in Germany. And then, of course, quantum. Now, quantum hasn't come into play yet, but quantum computing actually threatens to be one of the most amazing technological advances we've ever heard, but I'll leave you to research that on ChatGPT. But what it also means is there's another form of quantum, and that's human quantum, human energy, human stamina, human compassion. Because there's something about human beings where we defy physics. You know that stuff where people say, that can't be done, you haven't got the skill, it's going to take you too long, and you go, right, I'll show you, and you do it. How do you do it? How do you push through? You just create energy and stamina, don't you? We're amazing machines when it comes to that. Okay, so remember the S-curves. Now, just to give you an illustration, these are some of the companies that are doing this already. And I won't talk about all of them, but I will pick out a few. Hire and Menlo Innovations are two fantastic companies at two ends of the scale. Hire, tens of thousands of people creating electric goods. Menlo Innovations, about 100 people creating outstandingly strong technology. They have completely rid themselves of bureaucracy. And then big respect to UiPath, who started in Romania and are one of the most highest value robotic process automation companies in the world and a good place to work. And these companies are doing very different things to change the dynamic of how they apply people science, learning, technology, data, capabilities, and purpose-led organizations. We've heard about Patagonia already today. Tony's Chocolonely. That's one of the only chocolate companies in the world that can say we have no slavery or child labor in our cocoa production chain. They absolutely can guarantee that. Not that many of the others can do that. And Buurtzorg is a team of self-managed nurses in the Netherlands who don't have any corporate bureaucracy at all and deliver the highest standard of patient healthcare in the Netherlands, whose patients live longer than other people. I mean, what kind of value is that? That's immeasurable, right? So here's how we do it. These are the kind of capabilities for you to take away as your homework. How do you evolve? Well, I think there's something about that incremental mindset we've already heard. And I think we have to remember that mastery, that whole sense of competency and proficiency, is something we're going to have to keep topping up. We've got to be really adaptive about being really good at what we do. We definitely have to get digitally literate. We have to get really good, and we heard foresight earlier on, we have to get really good at predicting the shifts in skills that are needed in our organization. So really tune in to what you're seeing as like emerging capabilities, emerging skills. Some of those will be about the value I talked about there. We should become this most dynamic function in business, and we need to get good at scenarios. So that's how I think we can do it. Those are some of the features. And there's another image of what it looks like to go from knowledge economy, automation age, and regenerative era. For some reason now it's moved from a warrior princess to kung fu masters and robots. Maybe that's what the future of work will be, kung fu, mastery, and robots. So just a little quote before I sort of get onto just one announcement I want to make before we get through there. Dr. Thomas Chamorro-Premasic from Buenos Aires has done some amazing research on AI and the world of work. And I love this quote: the more we depend on AI and technology, the more we need to humanize the world. So I think that's something we can take into account. That's that. Now, I did have an announcement for you, because some of you in this room may know somebody who was an instrumental character in the world of HR in Romania. Roxana Măcanu. So what we would like to do at PTHR is we would like to remember Roxana by setting up the Roxana Măcanu Award. So what we want is for you to think about who makes the most outstanding contribution to the HR profession in Romania. Let us know. Fill in some application form which we'll put together. and we will, in Roxana's name, make sure that her legacy of the future of the profession, the strength of the community, and the belief that we can become the most powerful part of business, in Roxana's name, we'll make sure that somebody gets that kind of recognition. And that's it from me. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. We will see you soon at the Q&A.
Yep.
Thank you.